The day your neighbor smiles while quietly making your life miserable is the day you should stop arguing and start paying attention. Every Tuesday morning began with exactly the same sound. The heavy plastic wheels of my dark green trash can should have been resting neatly beside my driveway after the sanitation truck completed its route. Instead, I would step outside with a mug of hot coffee in my hand and find the can lying on its side halfway across my front lawn, its lid flipped open, scattered leaves clinging to the damp plastic from the morning dew. At first I blamed the wind. Then I blamed the garbage crew. After the third week, I stopped blaming anyone because one detail refused to make sense. Every other trash can on our quiet suburban street remained standing exactly where the homeowners had left it. Mine was the only one that somehow managed to fall over every single Tuesday. My name is Ryan Brooks, and I have lived in this neighborhood outside Denver for almost 11 years. I work as a mechanical engineer, which means I spend most of my days solving problems by looking for patterns instead of guessing at answers. That habit followed me home long before this strange routine started. I kept my lawn trimmed every Saturday morning, my mailbox freshly painted, my fence repaired before anyone could complain, and my trash can tucked against the edge of my driveway exactly as the community guidelines requested. I had never received a single violation notice from the Homeowners Association. That changed shortly after Patricia Collins joined the architectural committee. Patricia lived 3 houses away, walked the neighborhood every morning carrying a stainless steel travel mug, and somehow always seemed to notice tiny details nobody else cared about. If a hedge grew 2 inches higher than expected, she noticed. If someone forgot to bring their recycling bin inside before dinner, she noticed. If a flower bed looked different from the approved landscaping plan filed years earlier, she definitely noticed. At first, our conversations were perfectly polite. She smiled, waved, and complimented my landscaping. Then the comments started becoming strangely specific. She mentioned that trash containers reduced property values when left visible for too long. She reminded me more than once that community appearance reflected personal responsibility. I agreed every time because I actually believed she was trying to be helpful. Then the violation letters started arriving. According to the photographs attached by the Homeowners Association, my trash can had repeatedly been left tipped over in plain view of passing traffic. The dates matched every Tuesday morning, I had already noticed. The photographs were always taken before I left for work, making it appear as though I simply ignored the mess sitting in my own yard. I appealed the first notice politely, explaining that something unusual kept happening overnight or shortly after collection. The board thanked me for the explanation but stated there was insufficient evidence to reverse the warning. I accepted that answer because I still believed this was an unfortunate coincidence. Even so, something deep inside kept whispering that coincidences rarely arrive on the same day, at nearly the same time, week after week. The following Tuesday, I stood quietly behind my living room window watching the empty driveway after the garbage truck disappeared around the corner. The street looked peaceful beneath the bright Colorado sunshine. The air smelled like freshly cut grass, and somewhere in the distance a lawn mower hummed across another yard. Nothing happened for several minutes. Then I noticed a familiar figure walking slowly along the sidewalk carrying a stainless steel coffee mug, smiling exactly the way she always did, and for the first time I decided I was finished making assumptions. The next Tuesday morning I decided that if I wanted answers, I needed to stop reacting like a frustrated homeowner and start thinking like an engineer. I never stepped outside with accusations or confronted anyone walking past my house, because I had learned long ago that assumptions rarely survive contact with evidence. Instead, I stood quietly behind the living room curtains with my coffee growing colder in my hand, while soft sunlight stretched across the empty street. The garbage truck had already disappeared around the corner, leaving every container neatly positioned beside its owner's driveway. Mine stood perfectly upright where I had left it. For nearly 10 minutes, nothing disturbed the silence except birds singing from the maple trees and the distant sound of a sprinkler starting somewhere farther down the block. Then Patricia Collins appeared exactly as she always did, walking at an unhurried pace with her stainless steel travel mug in one hand and her phone in the other. She smiled politely toward another neighbor before slowing almost imperceptibly as she approached my driveway. From inside the house, I could not hear her footsteps, but I watched every movement carefully. She looked casually toward my front porch, glanced once up and down the street, then continued walking until she moved beyond my line of sight. I waited another minute before stepping outside. The trash can now rested on its side in the middle of my lawn with its lid open exactly the way it had every Tuesday for weeks. There was no strong wind, no passing delivery truck, no loose animal running through the yard. Just the same result following the same walk at almost the same time. Even then, I refused to accuse anyone because what I had seen through a window proved very little without clear documentation. That afternoon, I purchased a simple notebook and began recording every detail. Date, time, weather conditions, garbage collection schedule, position of the trash can before pickup, position after pickup, which neighbors were outside, even the direction of the breeze. My coworkers laughed when I mentioned keeping a handwritten log, but I knew patterns reveal themselves only to people patient enough to record them. Over the next 3 Tuesdays, the routine repeated with remarkable consistency. The sanitation workers always left the container standing upright. I personally confirmed it from my front window. Several minutes later, Patricia walked past during her usual morning route. Shortly afterward, the container appeared lying across the grass, perfectly positioned for another violation photograph. By then, I also noticed something else that had escaped my attention before. The electronic mail containing each homeowners association warning always arrived less than an hour after the container fell over, complete with photographs showing the exact condition I found outside. Somebody was not only reporting the problem with surprising speed, but seemed to know exactly when to look for it. I appealed the second notice with a calm explanation and attached my written timeline. The board thanked me again, but explained that handwritten observations alone could not outweigh photographic evidence submitted by another resident. Reading that message, I realized something important. Patricia did not need to convince anyone she was right, because the photographs already appeared to tell the entire story. If I wanted the truth to matter, I would need something that could quietly speak for itself without relying on anyone's opinion, including mine. That evening, I climbed a small ladder beneath the front porch roof and installed a compact outdoor security camera aimed directly at the section of driveway where the trash container always waited after collection. It was not hidden, and it was not pointed toward anyone else's property. The camera faced only my own driveway, my own lawn, and the narrow strip of sidewalk immediately in front of my house. I checked the viewing angle twice, adjusted the motion sensitivity, synchronized the timestamp with my phone, and tested the recording quality until every detail looked perfectly clear. As an engineer, I trusted measurements far more than memories, and for the first time since the strange routine began, I felt as though I was finally replacing suspicion with facts. The following Tuesday, I woke before sunrise, rolled the trash container to the curb, and watched the sanitation truck empty it shortly after 8 o'clock. The crew placed the container neatly upright before driving away exactly as they always had. I waited another minute, confirmed everything looked normal, and returned inside without touching the camera again. Around 8:25, the familiar figure appeared on the sidewalk. Patricia Collins followed her usual route, carrying the same stainless steel travel mug, dressed in bright athletic shoes and a light jacket despite the pleasant weather. She slowed as she approached my driveway, looked briefly toward my porch, then continued walking. I resisted every temptation to step outside because I wanted the recording to capture an uninterrupted sequence. Less than 60 seconds later, my phone displayed a motion alert. I opened the live feed with a steady hand and immediately switched to the recorded clip. There it was, clearer than I could have imagined. Patricia casually walked back toward my driveway after glancing in both directions, reached for the side of my trash container, tipped it onto the grass with one smooth motion, took several photographs with her phone, and calmly continued her morning walk as though nothing unusual had happened. There was no hesitation, no surprise. The entire action lasted only a few seconds. I watched the recording again, then a third time, not because I doubted what I had seen, but because I wanted to understand every detail. The timestamp matched my handwritten log almost perfectly. Her arrival matched the same schedule I had recorded for weeks. The violation notice arrived by electronic mail 38 minutes later, complete with the same photograph showing my trash container lying across the lawn exactly as the video had captured it. I quietly saved the original recording, exported a backup copy, and stored both files alongside scanned images of my notebook, the warning letters, and every photograph the homeowners association had previously sent me. I also created a timeline showing garbage collection, Patricia's walk, the camera recording, and the electronic mail from the association. Looking across my desk that evening, I realized I no longer needed to convince anyone that something unusual had been happening. The evidence had begun telling the story on its own. Even then, I did not rush to contact the board because I had learned another valuable lesson from engineering. One successful test proves a possibility. Multiple identical results establish a reliable pattern. If Patricia believed the following Tuesday would be just another ordinary morning, I had every reason to let her believe exactly that. The fourth Tuesday arrived with bright blue skies, cool autumn air, and the kind of quiet neighborhood morning that made everything feel perfectly ordinary. I followed the exact same routine I had practiced for the previous several weeks because consistency mattered as much as the evidence itself. I rolled my trash container to the curb before sunrise, watched the sanitation crew empty it, and confirmed through both my front window and the security camera that the container remained standing exactly where the workers had placed it. Nothing about the morning suggested anything unusual was about to happen. Patricia appeared at nearly the exact same minute listed in every entry of my notebook. She wore another light jacket, carried the familiar stainless steel travel mug, and greeted a passing neighbor with the same pleasant smile she always seemed to wear during her morning walks. I stayed inside without moving away from the window. A few moments later, my phone displayed another motion notification. When I opened the recording, the sequence unfolded almost identically to every previous week. Patricia glanced toward my porch, looked briefly in both directions along the street, walked across the edge of my driveway, gently pushed the trash container until it tipped onto the grass, raised her phone, photographed the result, then continued walking as though nothing had happened. There was no hesitation because she clearly expected the routine to continue exactly as it always had. Less than 40 minutes later, another homeowners association violation notice arrived in my electronic mail. This time I did not even feel frustrated. Instead, I quietly saved the message beside the earlier notices and added another completed entry to my growing timeline. For consecutive Tuesdays now showed the same sequence. Garbage collection, upright container, Patricia's walk, camera recording, violation photograph, electronic mail from the homeowners association. Every event occurred within nearly identical time windows. Looking across my desk that evening, I realized the pattern had become stronger than any single video clip could ever be on its own. Even so, I still had no interest in embarrassing anyone or creating unnecessary conflict. My goal had never been revenge. My goal was simply to stop a problem that should never have existed in the first place. That was when an idea from my engineering background finally came together. If the entire routine depended upon the container being easy to tip over, perhaps the simplest solution was not another camera or another complaint. Perhaps the answer was to redesign the container's support so it naturally stayed upright without creating danger, inconvenience, or damage for anyone. I spent the next several evenings sketching different concepts at my garage workbench. I rejected anything that looked aggressive or unusual. Instead, I designed a clean, professional mounting base secured entirely within my own property beside the driveway. The container would rest inside a low-profile steel cradle anchored to a small concrete pad, with a simple owner-operated latch that allowed normal trash collection while preventing the container from accidentally tipping onto the lawn. It would remain easy for the sanitation crew to access, fully compliant with neighborhood rules, and completely harmless to anyone walking past. Best of all, it looked so ordinary that most people would never notice anything had changed. As I finished the final drawing and placed my notebook beside the blueprints, I could not help smiling. Next Tuesday would probably begin exactly like every Tuesday before it. The difference was that this time the routine would meet something it had never encountered before. Saturday afternoon became my workshop day. I measured the space beside the driveway 3 separate times before cutting the steel tubing for the mounting frame, because I wanted every dimension to look clean, intentional, and completely ordinary. The finished cradle sat low against the concrete pad, painted the same neutral gray as the trash container itself. A simple latch held the container securely in place, while still allowing me to release it in seconds whenever collection day arrived. The sanitation crew would never need to touch the mounting frame because I could unlock the container before sunrise and secure it again after they finished. There were no hidden mechanisms, no surprises, and nothing designed to inconvenience anyone walking along the sidewalk. The entire project existed for one reason only. A trash container could not be photographed lying across my lawn if it remained standing exactly where it belonged. When the next Tuesday morning arrived, I followed my routine exactly as before. Before dawn, I released the latch, rolled the container to the curb, and waited for the familiar sanitation truck. The workers emptied the container, returned it to its usual position, and continued down the street without noticing anything different. Once they disappeared around the corner, I wheeled the empty container back onto the mounting base, closed the latch, and walked quietly inside. The security camera continued recording every movement around the driveway while I watched from the living room with another cup of coffee growing cooler beside me. At precisely the same time listed in my notebook, Patricia appeared at the end of the sidewalk carrying her stainless steel travel mug. She waved toward another resident, slowed her pace near my driveway, and glanced toward my front porch exactly as she had done every previous week. A motion notification appeared on my phone. I opened the live recording and watched carefully. Patricia stepped toward the container with complete confidence, placed one hand against the side, and gave it a casual push. The container did not move. She paused for a moment, looked down with visible confusion, then tried again using a little more effort. The cradle held the container perfectly upright without shifting even an inch. She stepped back, looked around the quiet street, then leaned closer as though trying to understand why something so familiar suddenly behaved differently. After several seconds, she lowered her phone without taking a photograph, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and calmly continued walking toward the next block. I replayed the recording twice, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because the quiet simplicity of the moment was almost satisfying. There had been no argument, no raised voices, and no confrontation. The design had accomplished exactly what I intended. Later that morning, I checked my electronic mail expecting another violation notice. Nothing arrived. Noon passed. Then the afternoon. By evening, my inbox remained completely empty for the first Tuesday in more than a month. I saved the latest recording beside the previous videos and added one more line to my timeline. Every earlier entry ended with a violation notice. This one ended with silence. For the first time since the strange routine began, the pattern had finally changed, and I had a feeling the next move would not come from me. The silence lasted exactly 1 week. The following Monday afternoon, an electronic mail from the Homeowners Association appeared in my inbox requesting my attendance at the next board meeting regarding what they described as a recently installed exterior improvement. I smiled the moment I finished reading because I had expected that message ever since the violation notices suddenly stopped. Instead of feeling nervous, I opened the folder on my computer containing every recording, every photograph, every written timeline, and every copy of the previous warning letters. Then I scheduled a brief consultation with an attorney who specialized in homeowners association matters. We spent less than an hour reviewing the documentation together. He complimented the organization of my records before explaining that my installation complied with both the neighborhood guidelines and municipal regulations because it remained entirely on my property, created no obstruction, and presented no safety concern. More importantly, he suggested allowing the evidence to speak for itself instead of making accusations. That advice matched exactly what I had planned from the beginning. Tuesday evening arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air as I walked into the community clubhouse carrying one slim binder and a small tablet computer. Patricia sat across the room, speaking quietly with 2 board members. She glanced toward me for only a moment before returning to her conversation. When the meeting began, the board president thanked everyone for attending and explained that a question had been raised concerning the newly installed trash container support beside my driveway. I calmly described the mounting cradle, explained how it functioned, and presented photographs showing that sanitation workers could continue collecting trash without any additional effort. Every answer remained straightforward because there was nothing unusual about the design itself. Patricia then spoke. She claimed the structure looked unnecessary and suggested it changed the appearance of the neighborhood. One board member politely asked whether the installation violated any written architectural guideline. After reviewing the governing documents, another director quietly answered that no such restriction existed. The discussion could have ended there, but I respectfully asked whether I might provide additional background explaining why the support had been installed in the first place. The board agreed. I placed my tablet on the conference table and displayed the first security recording. The room remained completely silent as the video showed my trash container standing upright after collection. A few moments later, Patricia appeared, looked around the street, tipped the container onto my lawn, photographed it, and continued walking. I allowed the recording to finish before opening the second video from the following week. Then the third. Then the fourth. Each recording carried a visible time stamp matching the notebook entries and the electronic violation notices submitted to the Homeowners Association shortly afterward. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Several directors quietly compared the dates shown on the screen with the printed warning letters I had included inside the binder. Every document aligned perfectly. When the final recording ended, I closed the tablet without saying another word. For several long seconds, the only sound inside the meeting room came from the ceiling ventilation system. At that moment, I realized I no longer needed to defend myself because the evidence had already answered every question anyone could have asked. When the meeting resumed, the board president quietly thanked everyone for remaining professional before asking whether Patricia wished to respond to the recordings. She looked around the conference table for several long seconds before explaining that she had only been trying to help maintain neighborhood standards. She suggested the trash container must already have been unstable and claimed she had simply touched it while walking past. Nobody interrupted her explanation, but one director gently pointed toward the time stamps displayed beside each recording. The videos showed the sanitation crew leaving the container standing securely every single week. They also showed Patricia returning to the driveway after first walking beyond my property, then deliberately approaching the container before each violation photograph appeared in the Homeowners Association records. The sequence repeated too consistently to be explained by coincidence. Another board member carefully compared the recording dates with the electronic mail messages previously sent to me. Every complaint had been submitted within a short period after the camera documented the same routine. The room remained remarkably calm because the discussion no longer centered on opinions. It centered on documents, recordings, and timelines that agreed with one another in every important detail. My attorney quietly slid a copy of the neighborhood architectural guidelines across the table and pointed out that my mounting cradle complied with every written requirement governing exterior improvements. The structure remained entirely on my property, did not interfere with pedestrian access, did not obstruct sanitation services, and matched the community appearance standards. The board reviewed the guidelines page by page before unanimously confirming that no violation existed. The conversation then shifted toward the warning notices already placed in my homeowner file. After reviewing the evidence, the directors voted to withdraw every previous violation related to the trash container because each notice had relied upon photographs that failed to represent the complete sequence of events. The secretary updated the meeting minutes while another board member recommended adopting a new review procedure requiring supporting evidence whenever repeated complaints targeted the same homeowner. Listening quietly from my seat, I realized something unexpected had happened. The discussion was no longer about me at all. Instead, it had become an opportunity for the association to improve the fairness of its own processes. Patricia remained silent as the board completed its decisions. Before the meeting concluded, she looked toward me and acknowledged that she should have approached me directly if she believed a problem existed instead of repeatedly submitting complaints without a conversation. I appreciated the statement because it reflected far more maturity than another argument ever could. I simply replied that neighbors usually solved small misunderstandings much faster by speaking to one another than by exchanging violation letters. Several people around the table nodded in agreement. As everyone gathered their folders and prepared to leave, the atmosphere felt noticeably lighter than when the evening began. Outside, cool autumn air drifted across the neighborhood, while porch lights gradually illuminated the quiet street. Walking back toward my truck beneath the clear Colorado sky, I thought about the steel cradle still holding my trash container securely beside the driveway. The project itself had never been the real solution. It merely created the moment when the truth could finally remain standing long enough for everyone else to see it with their own eyes. Sometimes the strongest response to repeated frustration is not building something impossible to ignore. Sometimes it is building something so ordinary that the evidence quietly reveals everything on its own. The days following the meeting felt strangely peaceful. almost as though the neighborhood had quietly decided to press a reset button. The board distributed official meeting minutes, confirming that every previous violation related to my trash container had been withdrawn from my homeowner record. Along with that announcement came another document introducing a revised complaint review procedure. Future reports involving repeated neighborhood disputes would now require additional verification before formal notices could be issued. Reading those changes over breakfast one cool October morning, I realized the discussion had grown far beyond a single trash container. The association had used an uncomfortable situation to strengthen its own process, and that outcome benefited every homeowner on the street. During the following week, several neighbors stopped while walking their dogs to ask about the unusual steel cradle beside my driveway. Instead of describing the board meeting in detail, I simply explained that it kept the container stable after collection and had solved a recurring problem. Most smiled, nodded, and continued their morning walks without another question. A few quietly admitted they had always wondered why my container seemed to fall over so often while every other one remained standing. One retired couple even laughed gently and said they had started believing the neighborhood wind somehow disliked only my property. Hearing that reminded me how easily repeated events can become accepted as normal when nobody looks closely enough. Patricia continued walking past my house most mornings, but something had noticeably changed. She no longer slowed near the driveway. She no longer stopped beside the container, and no additional violation notices appeared in my electronic mail. On one occasion, she looked toward me while I trimmed a hedge near the front porch. Instead of avoiding eye contact, she offered a polite greeting. I returned the greeting with the same courtesy because carrying old disagreements into the future had never been my objective. The neighborhood felt far too peaceful to waste another day revisiting a conflict that had already been resolved. One Saturday afternoon, the board president unexpectedly visited my home carrying a small folder. He explained that several directors admired the practical design of the mounting cradle and wanted to include an example of acceptable trash container storage improvements within the next homeowner maintenance guide. I smiled at the irony. The same installation that had prompted questions only weeks earlier was now being considered a useful example for the community. I gladly shared the basic measurements and explained how the simple latch allowed normal sanitation collection while keeping the container upright afterward. There was nothing proprietary about the design. It solved a simple problem with an equally simple solution. As the board president prepared to leave, he thanked me for remaining patient throughout the entire process. He admitted that emotional arguments often produced very little progress, while organized documentation usually led to better decisions. After he drove away, I stood quietly beside the driveway looking at the gray steel cradle holding the container exactly where it belonged. It still looked almost invisible against the concrete, blending into the background as though it had always been there. That ordinary appearance made me smile because the best solutions rarely demand attention. They simply perform their purpose so consistently that people eventually forget the problem ever existed. Watching another peaceful evening settle across the neighborhood, I realized the real victory had never been proving someone wrong. It had been creating a situation where fairness became easier than assumption, and where simple evidence quietly encouraged an entire community to make better decisions. Several months have passed since that meeting, yet every Tuesday morning still reminds me how quickly small choices can shape an entire neighborhood. The sanitation truck arrives just after sunrise. The familiar hydraulic sounds echo briefly through the quiet street, and my trash container returns to the same gray steel cradle where it has remained ever since. It no longer attracts attention because there is nothing left to question. Children ride their bicycles past the driveway on the way to school, neighbors wave while walking their dogs beneath rows of changing maple trees, and the routine has become exactly what routines are supposed to be. Predictable, peaceful, ordinary. Looking back now, I realize the entire experience taught me far more than I expected. At the beginning, I believed I was dealing with a problem involving a trash container. Later, I thought I was dealing with repeated complaints from one determined neighbor. In the end, I discovered the real challenge had always been deciding how I wanted to respond when something unfair continued happening week after week. I could have answered frustration with more frustration. I could have confronted Patricia in the street or allowed every new violation notice to make me more angry than the last. Instead, I chose patience, documentation, careful observation, and one simple engineering solution that quietly removed the opportunity for the problem to continue. Ironically, the steel cradle became the least important part of the entire story. Its greatest purpose was never holding a trash container upright. Its greatest purpose was creating enough consistency for the truth to become impossible to ignore. Every notebook entry, every timestamp, every security recording, every electronic mail, and every ordinary Tuesday morning fit together like pieces of the same puzzle until the complete picture finally appeared. Since then, our homeowners association has continued using the updated complaint review process adopted after that meeting. Neighbors now receive opportunities to clarify unusual situations before formal violations are issued, and board members request additional supporting information whenever repeated complaints involve the same property. Those adjustments may seem minor, but they encourage conversations before assumptions and evidence before conclusions. I have spoken with several directors since then, and each has told me the revised process has reduced misunderstandings throughout the community. Patricia and I still see one another from time to time. We exchange polite greetings, continue walking, and allow the past to remain where it belongs. Neither of us needs to revisit those difficult weeks because the lesson has already served its purpose. Respect grows much more easily when people choose direct communication over quiet suspicion. Occasionally, a new resident notices the mounting cradle beside my driveway and asks where I bought it. I smile, explain that I designed it myself, and describe how it keeps the container stable after collection. Most assume I simply enjoy building practical projects around the house. I usually leave the explanation there because the hardware itself is not the memorable part of the story. The real story is hidden inside the patience that came before it. Whenever I step outside on another calm Tuesday morning and see the container standing exactly where it belongs, I no longer think about complaints, meetings, or security recordings. I think about how remarkably powerful simple facts can become when someone gives them enough time to stand on their own. That quiet lesson has stayed with me far longer than any violation notice ever could, and every peaceful morning since then has reminded me that lasting justice rarely arrives through the loudest voice. More often, it arrives through steady preparation, honest evidence, and the confidence to let the truth remain standing long enough for everyone else to recognize it for themselves.